Anyone who believes in indefinite growth on a physically finite planet is either mad or an economist.
We don't want to focus politics on a notion that involves the rejection of principles around which a large majority of our fellow citizens organize their lives.
We are not as endlessly manipulable and as predictable as you would think.
Once, a few years back, I was in the southwestern part of the United States, and I was at a conference of women talking about peace. And when I get agitated about a subject, I can be quite passionate, and I don't know if emotional is the word, but I get very passionate, and I can tend to talk on top of people, which is rude. So I was passionate about something, and I don't remember, because I get passionate about tons of things. And in the Q&A part at the end, a woman stood up in the back, and she didn't question, she had a comment, and she was quite fierce in her commentary. "You are so angry. You're so angry. How can you call yourself a peace activist?" I thought about that quite a bit, because people who know me very well know I am fully capable of anger, sometimes almost bordering on rage, which I try to tone down because it's not very Nobel and it makes my mom very agitated. My mom is charming, I adore her. She made me stop using the F-bomb in public because it tarnished my image. And she likes me to be a little calmer if I can be. So I gave a lot of thought to anger, and I can be angry. What I feel in my work is quite different. Not that I don't have moments of anger, but what has fueled my passion for change really is righteous indignation at injustice. And it took me really a long time to make that distinction for myself and be really clear about the difference. And it really started, my oldest brother was born in 1947. He was born deaf. And he was treated nastily by boys who lived next door, Billy and Bobby. And they liked to torment him particularly because the sound of his voice, I don't know if you all know deaf people, but the sound that they make is quite different from hearing people because they can't modulate their voice. They don't know what it sounds like. And those two got off on making my brother terrified so he would make those noises. And one time I wanted to go and beat them up. They had treated him so bad. I really did. I wanted to grab them and thrash them. However, they got away. And I am lucky they got away because I was like 6 or 7 and they were 10 or 11, you know, and they were boys and I was the girl. I would have gotten beaten up, not the reverse. But that really started me, I guess, unconsciously thinking about bullying. And I don't even know if we used that word back then, bullying, but people being mean to other people just because they could. And over the years, that bullying business translated to not just individuals bullying other individuals, whether one-on-one or in groups, but also nations bullying other nations. And that became particularly prominent for me in when I was at university from 1968 to 1972 at the University of Vermont, way up on the Canadian border in the east, with the Vietnam War. Till that point, I had really believed all of the beautiful myths. Every country makes myths about its history and its greatness. That's very natural. I had believed all of the mythology about the US, including that we support self-determination and democracy and open our doors to everybody, et cetera, et cetera. And then we started seeing, you know, Vietnam on the television every night. Unlike the wars of today, we saw that all the time. It was on television. And our friends were, you know, draft age. So people you knew were going to be sent off to this country on the other side of the planet that most of them couldn't even identify on a map. And they were going to be killing people. Why? And that was a big awakening for me, and ultimately led to over years of confusion as a kid graduating from college with a degree in psychology, which prepared me for not very much. So I did a series of nondescript jobs while I tried to figure out my place in life. And somehow underneath all of that, I knew that ultimately, as a US citizen who believes in my country and loves my country, I wanted to do something to change it a bit, to shift some of the, make more of the mythology reality. I felt a big obligation to try to stop US military intervention whenever we wanted, just because we could. And I became very involved in the wars in Central America in the 1980s under Mr. Ronald Reagan, where he was drawing the line against communism. It was very difficult work. If you did that work, you were labeled the commie simp or, a communist. And I would bet my bottom dollar that people in the United States could not give an accurate definition of communism. They're very agitated about Obama, the socialist. They certainly couldn't define socialism, but that's what we were labeled at the time. And I did 11 years in that region, in and out, and was burned out. It was now 1991, and I actually contemplated getting a straight job, a real job. I went to this store called Casual Corner. I don't know that you all have it over here. Oh, it was for, women of a certain age who wanted to be, in business. Usually ended up as secretaries, but we pretended that it was a stepping stone to another job. And I got my first black pantsuit. And I went to a company which would help you find a job, right? And then once they found you the job, they would take part of the money for the pleasure of having gotten you a job. And it was like hate at first sight, I have to say. I walk in, she looks at me, and she's kind of startled. And I looked at her, and I was more startled than she was looking at me. And I knew she'd never do anything for me, and she knew I would never call her again. But she did say, I'm going to have to look at this information very closely and see if I can mainstream you. Fortunately, I was not mainstreamed. I was saved from myself. When the Vietnam Veterans of America Foundation asked me if I wanted to try to bring together non-governmental organizations in a political effort of civil society, ordinary people like you and me, to tackle the problem of anti-personnel landmines, to ban them. And it was so exciting to me. I didn't have to have a straight job. I didn't have to wear the suit more than that one time, although I still have it in my closet as a memento. And we grew. The thing about that campaign that makes me so proud as a person, as an ordinary person, is that it wasn't just me. I'm often introduced as an example of one individual who has changed the world, and that is bunk. The reason we changed the world in the Landmine Campaign is because we were thousands, and in some instances, millions of ordinary people who came together with a common goal of pressuring their governments to do what they should have done anyway. And it wasn't just me that received the Peace Prize, it was we. It was the International Campaign to Ban Landmines and myself. And in addition to getting governments within the space of 5 years to create this treaty banning anti-personnel landmines, we also made ordinary people around the world understand that it's not magic, that it isn't something special for people with a title, or somebody like Martin Luther King up on a pedestal, who was very human and had his own foibles, by the way, that anybody can be an agent of change. All it really takes is finding what you feel the most passionate about, and I don't care what it is. It doesn't have to be a thing I care about. It can be the environment. It can be LGBTQA, on and on. It can be anything. But if it is an issue that stirs your passion, and by working on it, you can contribute to the greater good, including for those who you do not necessarily like politically or ideologically, I think that everybody should volunteer a couple hours a month. I think people think that if they can't tackle all of the world's problems and make it all better overnight, there's no purpose. I totally disbelieve that. I believe that every action really does contribute to change. And you would never have heard me saying these things back in the Salvador days. I was hardline. I was fierce. But over the years and watching the process of change, and I believe that we have to feel empowered to make that choice. And if we choose to feel passionate about something and do nothing, it is a choice. You have chosen to do nothing. And believe me, there are other people who will step into that gap, take your power, and use it to accomplish what they want. I will end noting that the Landmine Campaign went from 2 NGOs and a staff of 1, moi, to 1,300 non-governmental organizations in about 80 to 90 countries that in the space of 5 years took an idea and got the Mine Ban Treaty, which is truly outstanding. That campaign still continues, and because of that, the Mine Ban Treaty is one of the most complied with treaties in the world, because the ICBL, the landmine people, are there pushing to make sure the governments obey the laws they created. Because too often, laws are lovely. You make a law, but if you don't implement it, it's irrelevant. It's words on paper.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the book that Jody's written, a memoir really of her life, sort of up to the wonderful moment of getting the UN treaty on the banning of landmines, getting it through and getting it turned into reality. It's a fascinating read, but it has a sort of foreword written by Eve Ensler, the playwright and feminist and writer. And she says, and I just want to know what you feel about this, she says in her foreword to you, she says, I have pretty much lost faith in government, world leaders, or patriarchal institutions to reverse the sad and terrifying trajectory of human beings. Have you lost faith in our political leaders and our institutions as well?
Well, before I answer that directly, I just want to quote 2 of my good friends, His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Tutu. And when you get the Peace Prize, you get to know some very cool people, I have to say. That is one true benefit.
I think that qualifies as name dropping, but that's fine.
No, they really are friends. And it also got my mom and dad off my back. They wanted me to get a job they could understand. And when I got the Peace Prize, it was all cool. The Arch and His Holiness have said repeatedly in public that men have messed up this planet for millennia. And it's time for most of y'all, all y'all, to step aside and let the women take charge. I don't feel quite that strongly. I would have before the Landmine Campaign. My experiences with government when I worked in Central America were nothing but rotten. But through the experience of the Landmine Campaign and then the efforts that brought about the ban of cluster munitions and what's happening now with Norway and other countries that are coming together looking at the humanitarian implications of nuclear weapons and our new effort to stop killer robots, we've come to know really great individuals who are part of government. It's finding people, it doesn't really matter where you're working. It's finding people who get it, who can take off their uniform, whether it's the uniform of a politician or diplomat, or the uniform of a military person, or the uniform of an activist, whatever that is.
One thing that intrigues me is why, given the strength of your passion and your disgust with what you've seen of US policymaking in the international arena, you've never really focused your own activist efforts internally on trying to change politics in America. Is that because that is one area where you think it's beyond your power to achieve change, or no, it just doesn't? Why is that? Because you feel strongly about the results, but...
Sure. I feel strongly about the decay of democracy in my country. I may get involved, but my whole history has been foreign policy, because I don't know how many of you have heard this. What people say is, when there is an election in the United States of America, every person in the world should be allowed to vote. because if the United States sneezes, it is felt around the world. I think part of my feelings have to do with that. You know, everything my country does in terms of the, you know, forever wars that we engage in, because we can, affects people around the world and in ways that we can't even figure out yet. And yet we still sally forth and do it. There's no long-term analysis of the impacts of engaging in war.